This is Fred Honold, Hometown Television, with my new best friend here, Ted. And we're thinking of the Ted and Fred show, and we're here with Kim Kavin. We may have a road show here, Kim. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Good. I enjoyed thoroughly part one. Ted, if you could introduce Ted, also known as Thaddeus, from what I understand, from Home for Good Dog Rescue out of Berkeley Heights.
He is. He's with this great rescue group out of Berkeley Heights, like you said, Home for Good Dog Rescue. He is a 5-month-old dachshund-ish, let's call him.
Okay.
Nobody knows for sure. But he's been sitting here with us in the studio for quite a little while now, and I have to say he's one of the calmest, easiest, gentlest dogs that I've ever met. So I think anybody who's interested in either getting to know Teddy or one of the other great dogs they have at Home for Good Dog Rescue should check them out in Berkeley Heights.
Absolutely. A great Thanksgiving Day gift here, since we're right around that time. We have one of the co-founders here for the home, Rich Erico, and also Tony Anturco is the other co-founder, couldn't be with us today, and Matt, their communications director.
No, people can see his beautiful face.
Yeah, hi Ted. I noticed Ted is looking at your books back here too. Right?
Well, they do have pictures of the dog on the cover, so
That'll
maybe he sees a kindred spirit there.
So we talked in our opening round about how when you basically rescued a dog, your dog Blue, you suddenly found out the backstory about rescuing. Got you very involved in the whole space of saying, what's going on here in the dog industry? You started going to conferences, you found out about auction houses out in Missouri. And in that, Kim, you really came across kind of a fascinating dynamic that, as you said, themed through the recent election. Different cultures throughout the United States. Out in the Midwest, dogs like livestock are raised. Here in the East, we love dogs. They're part of the family. They're in bed with us at night, sleeping sound away. And in the thick of that, you found a much deeper story about commerce and business.
True. And there's also, parts of the South, which is where Teddy here is from, where the spay-neuter rates are low. And a lot of people take puppies like him, they'll get boxes of puppies like him in the shelters down there, which you don't see up here where we live. And that's why a lot of the rescuers are moving dogs from the South to the North. So you have all kinds of different philosophies, I guess you would say, of how dogs should be treated, whether they are family members, whether they are disposable. And a lot of times those people are very, very heated, and the word I like to use is passionate about how they feel and how they don't want to be dictated to by other parts of the country about how they should treat their dogs.
And the spay and neuter is so key. I think you said with your dog Blue that Blue was one of a group of 5 out of 100 that was rescued. What is the kill rate, if you will, call it?
The shelter where Blue came from, they had a 95% kill rate unless rescuers like Home for Good Dog Rescuers went in there. Home for Good Dog doesn't work with that particular shelter, but there's lots down there that have very high intake numbers and just not enough homes to put the dogs in down there. Whereas up here, demand is sky high for a great mutt like Teddy, and so they bring them up on trucks and put them in foster homes. And I've had almost 24 foster dogs myself. Most of them have come from the South. And you learn a lot fostering dogs. You learn, most dogs are awesome. And, it's insane that we're killing them off in shelters the way we have been. You also learn that not all dogs are as advertised. I had nothing but friendly, healthy dogs sent to me. Turned out to only be true about 2/3 of the time. About a third of them needed substantial medical care. One I would call vicious. She attacked Blue. She bit me 5 times. Wow. And, this is a dog that they were going to place in a home. So there's some buyer beware, not only in breeding, but in rescue nowadays too, just because of the sheer volume of dogs being moved and the completely Wild West level of regulation that we have over all different kinds of breeders and rescuers. I don't think consumers really understand how much buyer beware really needs to be part of the equation.
Take us more into that in a few moments with the regulation. One thing I was fascinated by is in your talk where I first heard you, you took us back a few centuries in terms of how the whole notion of breeding began, and it actually started in a curious way.
The fat cows.
With cows.
The fat cows.
Tell us that story.
Dogs, of course, have been with humans for centuries, for millennia. But what we think of as purebreds today, the majority of the breeds that we know today were invented in about the past 150 years or so.
Invented?
Packaged, described, and invented.
So before that, 200 years back, we didn't think of dogs in terms of being in breeds.
They thought of a spaniel as a dog who chased ducks in the water. Didn't matter what the spaniel looked like.
More functional.
Right. Function versus looks.
Okay.
What happened was, back in Elizabethan England, you had the aristocrats who had all the money and all the land, and they got it in their heads that one way to display one's wealth was to have the fattest cow, because you needed to be able to feed the cow, you needed to have land to keep the cow, you needed to have a way to transport the cow, and poor people couldn't do that. Rich people could do that. So they started having these competitions to develop these really fat cows. If you ever go to an art museum and you see pictures of cows taken from the side and you think, what were those people thinking?
I've always thought that's an oddity.
They were displaying the girth of their cow over their fireplace to show their status. And what they eventually figured out, because there's a reason rich people stay rich, is that the poor people would pay money to go look at the fat cows. So they started to have livestock shows. And people would go pay a shilling and go and look at look at Mr. Whoever's enormous fat cow. And the poor people, this was a time in human history before there was a middle class. And that was just starting to bubble up. The seeds of that were just starting to bubble up.
So what time frame are we talking
We're
about?
around just before the middle of the 1800s.
Okay.
And what started to happen was the people realized, well, we're never going to be able to have a fat cow in our little flat in, the city where we live. But did you see that cute little dog that the Baron von whoever had with him when he was displaying the cow? We could do that. We could get a dog like that. And so the quote-unquote wannabe people started to get dogs that looked like the aristocrat dogs. And they would try to pass them off and sell them as, this is a dog just like his dog. And the wealthier people got upset and said, hang on a minute, that's not like my dog at all. This was when the first kennel clubs were formed. And they started to say, this is the definition of a terrier. This is the definition of a Labrador, on and on and on. And then they started to realize people would pay money to go to the dog shows. And this is where the modern day dog shows started coming from. And the more and more it all became intertwined as a business, the more and more the marketing became important. So, for instance, they couldn't get any takers on the yellow retrievers. The king or whoever had black retrievers, and so everybody wanted black retrievers, and the yellow retriever people would go to the dog show and say, why doesn't anyone want our dogs? So they changed the name to Golden.
Huh.
What do you think happened? Flew off the shelves, and here we are today. What's one of the most popular breeds? Golden Retriever.
About packaging and branding.
The very popular Boston Terrier started out as an American Bull Terrier. Which one sounds more aristocratic? This is why we have the Yorkshire Terrier and these kinds of names. A lot of this was marketing and packaging, and over
the Boston Brahmins.
And over the years, they just kept building more and more breeds. You see them rolled out at the dog shows like new car models now. We had, I think, 7 introduced at Westminster last year.
7 new breeds.
Yeah, and there'll be more that come out this year. I think the Puli is one of them, P-U-L-I. Just that if you watch the shows from the perspective of business, you're looking at new models being rolled out and on-the-shelf models being ginned up so that people will buy more of them.
Wow. And with the breeding is a precarious business. In a way, genetically, across any species, the healthiest is crossbreeding, right?
Breeding is so controversial, and I don't claim to be an expert. I've never bred a litter of dogs, but there's no doubt and no question that even with breeders who people would consider the highest level of breeders doing the best job possible, they're sometimes turning out really sick dogs, or dogs whose faces are so squished they can't even breathe and they have to have surgery on their noses, or dogs whose backs are so sloped they look like they're half frog in the show ring, and that does go on. But
you would use some examples. I guess the bulldog with the flattened face.
Pekingese would be one with
the
a flattened
shepherd frog,
face.
right? The German shepherd, the frog legs.
The shepherds have the frog legs now. It tends to come in waves where different breeds have different problems. Right now over in England, the Cavalier King Charles Spaniels are being born with a condition where their skulls are too small for their brains. Imagine the pain and suffering that causes. So again, consumer demand is driving these popular breeds. Everybody breed these dogs, everybody breed these dogs. And you start to end up with some situations that are not good for the dogs. And so breeding is, as you said, precarious across the board. Some breeders are desperately trying to do the right thing and create wonderful, healthy, fantastic dogs. others are trying to cash in and make a buck on whatever it is we want to buy.
And like your analogy with the auto industry, 8 million dogs, is it a year that are purchased?
8 million pet dogs a year in America, and I've heard estimates, I haven't seen proof, but I've heard estimates that they expect it to go up to 9 or 10 million dogs a year because millennials, apparently, there was a story in the Washington Post, millennials are getting dogs at a faster pace than the baby boomers and the Generation Xers did. About half of us wanted dogs. Millennials are buying them at about 75% because they're holding off on getting married and they're holding off on having children, so they go out and get a dog. And that's only shooting up the consumer demand for purebred and mutt purchases alike.
Incredible.
Well, and it affects the whole marketplace. You know, where do we think these dogs are going to come from? When you look at the statistics, what we have right now is about 4 million dogs a year going into the shelters. And easily, probably 90% of them are great dogs who shouldn't be there, who need a little training or some medical care, something happened. But let's say we give all 4 million a home tomorrow, which I'm all for. You know, let's do it. Let's give all 4 million shelter dogs a home. Well, you're still 4 to 6 million dogs a year short to fill consumer demand in the United States. And there's not enough home-based little mom and pop breeders to produce that many dogs. So we are the reason that we have the big commercial breeding farms, and we are now starting to have to come to terms with how the dogs are treated there. Because if we're going to keep demanding this many dogs every year, this is what's going to keep going on.
Absolutely. I thought Ted might have a question there for a moment. How does the U.S. compare to other parts of the world with dogs? Are we an
are
anomaly?
the big kahuna. We are the driver of the marketplace. But overall, Europe, particularly Britain, they also want a lot of dogs. They're number 2. And then you start to see what's coming up now in the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Dogs, everywhere you go around the world, the business model repeats. Whenever you start to get a middle class, they start to have a little more time and a little more money, and they look around at the street dogs, and they say, oh, we have to help the street dogs. And then you inevitably get people say, well, I don't want a street dog. I want a dog like the rich people have. I want a purebred. Then you start to get the breeding farms. It's a pattern that lifts up and repeats all around the world. Some of the pet stores here in the United States are announcing that they are launching stores now in the Middle East because they see the middle class now starting to rise up in the Middle East, and they're going to repeat the business model there. So if you look at what is happening in the United States, you can transplant that all across the world. And as more and more cultures come in line with globalization, whatever you want to call it, and have middle classes with money to spend, this is what you're going to see. The pattern will repeat, and the same problems and challenges in breeding and rescue alike all around the planet.
So it's predictable in a sense, that pattern.
Yeah, it's been going on for decades.
And in effect driven by the middle class, if you will, and now the millennials?
Yeah, you know, who doesn't want a dog, right?
It's true.
I have 2. What's not to love it?
Yeah.
It kind of completes your home, you know.
8 million a year in the U.S. going up to 9. Any guess as to how many dogs in the U.S. altogether? Thinking our population
Almost
is about...
half the households in America have a dog.
Okay.
What I like to say is almost half the households have a dog, and it's not the same half that voted for Clinton or Trump. So we should be able to come together and have conversations about how to treat the dogs better. Yeah.
So in a way, with this success, this commercial success, and the shows like the Westminster driving more demand, the shows you said earlier, between Christmas and Easter, then the more demand on the kennels and the rescuer, enter the regulators. Because now really you have commerce, like you said earlier, the Wild West, that needs some guidelines, needs some rules. So what's happening on the regulatory front?
It's a mess. And as a consumer, it's horrifying to me that we don't have better oversight going on.
Why a mess?
So on the breeding side, well, let's just take the breeding side to start.
So this is the supply side in a way.
If you are not breeding 4 or more female dogs a year, you are considered off the radar. You can pretty much do whatever you please. There's no regulation whatsoever of those breeders. If you're breeding 4 or more a year, then you're considered a commercial scale breeder, and you are monitored, licensed, and inspected by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which sounds really good until you realize that the standards they're using, that they're basing what do we consider okay, they were written in 1965, and they haven't really changed much since. And they say that a dog the size of a beagle can live in a cage the size of a dishwasher for her life, period. And that's considered okay right now. And this is what a lot of the so-called puppy mill arguments are about, where the breeders are saying, but we're legal. And the welfare people are saying, hang on a minute, that's not the same as humane. So that's the breeding side. You either have people being regulated to standards that most of us would agree are ancient and antiquated and need updating, or you have people not being regulated at all. Then you get over to the rescue side. Unless you're a shelter facility that has to meet certain health codes and things like that, you're mostly talking about people moving dogs and putting them in their homes and foster homes and bringing them to adoption events and getting them adopted. There's pretty much no regulation of that either. I had almost 24 foster dogs. I could have done anything to those dogs and nobody would have known. They were sitting in my living room, and who am I? No one's coming to inspect me. So as a consumer, you probably assume that there's some kind of safeguards in place to make sure that the breeders and the rescuers are treating the dogs responsibly. And a lot of times that just is not the case. You're just taking people on their word, and whatever smart questions you can ask. It's why I put a full chapter of questions you can ask in the dog merchant's book, because we have to really be more diligent as consumers than we are being. We don't want to give money to any breeder or rescuer who is treating dogs badly. We want to support the good ones across the board, is where I come down.
How many litters can a dog have in a year?
It depends on whom you ask and how many should they have over a lifetime. The breeders argue about it. And I know that at Purdue University right now, they're trying to do a study on this to bring some kind of resolution to that debate. But breeders tend to tell you it's physically possible maybe every year and a half or so to expect a litter. Some will say you can push it farther than that. Some will say you should skip a breeding cycle or two. They're all over the map.
So approximately a year and a half. How many dogs typically to a litter?
It depends on the breed of dog. You know, some dogs will have 3 puppies, some dogs will have 10 puppies. It depends on the breed.
And over a lifetime of a dog, how many litters could a dog carry potentially?
Depends on whether you want to treat the dog like a baby factory or not. You know, you figure you can breed a dog till she's, what, 7 or 8, maybe a little older, and if you're getting a litter every year and a half, that's not a small amount of puppies.
So you're talking 3 to 4 litters?
You could be talking dozens of puppies.
Dozens of puppies in that case.
Yeah.
So where does the regulatory authority lie? Is it at the state level, at the federal level? Will the Department of Agriculture look to extend its reach, or
that's what I hear is coming next? And I haven't personally spoken with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the federal level, but what I've heard is rescue has now become such big business that they're going to start to look at it the way that they look at the breeders. Because for the consumer, again, the end result is the same. When you bring a dog into your home, you want a dog who is as advertised, right? If I'm told that Teddy here is friendly and healthy, and Teddy shows up in my house and he's not friendly and healthy, somebody should be held accountable for that.
Right.
I'm not saying necessarily fines or violations or whatnot, but there should be some kind of licensing or accountability that the consumer can trust. And so what I've heard is, and I've heard it for a few years now and I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is looking to start to extend some of the things that we do with the commercial scale breeders over to the rescuers, who are, some cases, moving more dogs into homes than those breeders are every year. And someone's got to start paying attention to that.
So if you looked at humane standards for both breeders and rescuers, what would you advocate that should be done to take care of dogs?
You're just going to have people sending me hate mail all day long with these questions. It's an argument, and there is really no scientific basis for a lot of this stuff. It's whatever people think. I did sit down with some animal control officers and people who transport dogs, people who rescue dogs, people who breed dogs. What they tend to say is, look, we're generally looking for dogs to be transported in a safe way where you don't have 85 dogs jammed into the back of a van with no climate control by a breeder or a rescuer.
So that's the transport. Like from New Jersey, we'll hear like Home for Good Dog Rescue goes down to Virginia or Georgia or North Carolina.
Right. Or a breeder would be bringing dogs in from across state lines. We're generally trying to make sure, okay, we want to make sure the dogs are being transported in a way that they're safe, they're not freezing. We had the case here in New Jersey with Just Pups where they were left out in a freezing cold van outside of a pet store. We want to avoid that. Once the dog gets here, we want to make sure the dog is actually healthy. they are supposed to come with health papers. It's not legal to transport a dog across state lines in most states without health papers. But a lot of times the dogs are moved without the health papers, and you get a dog like my dog Blue, who showed up with health papers and had to have 2-week quarantine because he had health problems that were not disclosed.
Right.
So maybe there should be a requirement for a veterinary check when they get here in the state of sale. Maybe, I'm saying possibly. Possibly for dogs who are 6 months or older, we need to be mandating temperament tests so that it's not just, oh, the dog seems friendly, and they put the dog in a home and the dog bites a kid's face off, whether it's a purebred or a mutt, you know.
Right.
These are pretty common sense things that sometimes get really, really lost in the mix of moving a lot of dogs really fast, which breeders and rescuers alike are doing. So what I would like to see are some common sense solutions like that, but we're a long, long way from that because the lobbyists do not agree. They like to point fingers at the other side. The breeders say the rescuers are a problem, the rescuers say the breeders are a problem, and almost every piece of legislation that gets introduced falls along those party lines.
And do the states play a role in this at all? In
commercial breeding, usually. Commercial scale breeding, there's usually state level regulations too.
So who would that report up into?
The state veterinarian's office, or if they have a Department of Animal Agriculture. Different states have different setups, obviously.
Right. Yeah. And then what dogs are held in at the stores or rescuers, is that something too that should be more
I would love to see it regulated because I had an animal control officer here in the state of New Jersey. She has 22 years of experience dealing with every kind of person, moving every kind of dog you can imagine. And she said to me, I cannot tell anymore the difference between the puppy mills and some of these rescuers. When I go into the basements of the homes of some of these rescuers, I see what I see in the worst of the breeders. Because they're in stacked cages, they're not getting any daylight, they're not getting any exercise, they're not getting any food and water. Now again, I want to be very clear, there are phenomenal breeders and phenomenal rescuers who treat the dogs great. They treat the dogs great, but when you get consumer demand at the level that we have it, you're gonna get people who cut corners. Maybe their motives are good, maybe their motives aren't so good.
Right.
I don't really care. I want a regulation on how they have to treat the dogs. I don't want to try to regulate what's in their heart. Personally, I'd like to try to regulate how they're treating the dogs. How do we do that? I don't have a clue. You'd need an inspector in half the houses in New Jersey at this point with the number of foster dogs we have.
Right.
But I do think what we're trying to enact right now in New Jersey, where they at least have to have a license that can be revoked, I think that's a good first step. I think you have to have some way to hold people accountable who are putting dogs in homes.
Mm-hmm. Now, we did mention in the first portion, we want to mention here again, you, based on your experience, wanted to make sure that out in the public we know about breeders and rescuers. You have a website.
I did. What I realized was that as consumers, if I want to know if a hotel is any good, I can go on TripAdvisor and look at the ratings. Or if a restaurant is good, I can go on Yelp and look at the ratings. I can't do that for breeders, rescuers, pet stores, shelters. It doesn't exist. There's no way to know. So I created dogmerchants.com with the hope that people like me, average people like me, will say, this is where I got my dog and this is what happened when I got the dog home. Is this a 1-star merchant or a 5-star merchant? And my hope is that together as consumers and dog lovers, we can raise up all the responsible people across the board and expose the ones who are not treating the dogs well.
So I can go on, I can rate the breeder or the rescuer, I can put comments in?
Yep, pictures, comments, videos, whatever you want.
All right, that's good.
Please do.
Yes.
I think we should give Teddy 5 stars. He's being such
I think
an
Teddy
angel.
gets 5 stars along with you for a great interview here, and also what a personality.
Has he opened his eyes once?
On occasion, but very infrequent. I know he's trying to get 2 questions in here, but we've been talking away. But in the 5 minutes remaining, you've had a stellar career. You've done books and articles on dogs. You've done a lot of investigative reporting. You start out early on as an executive editor of a number of Midwest newspapers. You end up for this position a lot of people would die for, executive editor of Yachting Magazine.
I was, yeah.
You travel the globe, you sit on yachts.
I started out actually as an intern at the Asbury Park Press in Monmouth County.
Is that where it all started? Okay.
Yeah, I was the editor of the Crimson Courier at Wall High School in Monmouth County.
Okay.
And I did my first internship on Long Beach Island for their bureau at the Asbury Park Press, yeah.
Right.
And then I went off to journalism school in Missouri and became a daily newspaper editor. And then I somehow landed in the yacht magazine world, which I highly recommend it if you can get that job. It's a fun job.
I can imagine, yes.
Yeah.
Favorite spot in the world you've traveled to?
Everyone asks me that, and it depends on what you like to do. But I will say, for animals, if you care about animals, either the Galapagos Islands or South Africa is where you need to be, because in those places, nature is what nature is. And you see, in South Africa, you see the wild dogs and how they live in the wild. And it's a stunning thing to see. It's beautiful.
Galapagos, isn't that where Darwin did his studies?
It is. Origin of Species
Origin
came
of
from
Species,
there.
right.
Yeah.
What's next for you? From newspapers to yachts to dogs?
Well, my agent would like me to write a book about boats next. I don't know. I keep feeling like I should write about the dogs. I think he and I are going to have a few conversations, but and we're losing Teddy here for sure. He's going out like a light.
Teddy's getting a little shy here.
Yeah.
Right?
No, you'll still definitely see me both Yachting Magazine. I write for Yachts International, a few other places, and you'll see me working on the dog stuff too. When you write a book like The Dog Merchants, more stories tend to come out of the woodwork, so you'll see a few more coming from me.
Conferences, speaking tours?
I'll be speaking in January at the Pet Industry Leadership Conference out in Malibu, California, or Laguna Beach, somewhere like that.
You know how to choose your locations.
How bad could that be, right?
I know, I know. And are there any, people want to learn more, are there any formal conferences that overlay the whole industry, whether it be on the demand purchase side or the supply side?
I think there's conferences all over the place, like once a month. Whether you want to learn more about rescue or breeding, different people are putting those conferences on. But if you just go online and type dog rescue conference or dog breeding conference, you're going to find plenty of places to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Kim, it's been a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for
and
all
thank
the
you to Home for Good Dog Rescue for letting us have Teddy
isn't
here
this nice?
today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ted, I would think, is easily going to be adopted sometime before the holidays.
I would take him. If I didn't already have two, he's great.
Listen, the show's not over yet, right? So Kim, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, yeah. And to our viewers, a special thank you. This is a two-part segment with Kim Kavin, who has written books on dogs, has done the investigative reporting behind it. So please tune into both. And with a special thanks to Ted, we're going to do a show in the future here, Ted, right? And Kim, a good day.
Thank you, you too.
Take care. Bye-bye.